Okay, well, it is 4:16, 17, right in the ballpark there, and it is just me and Member Oswald and audience and staff. So, Member Oswald, can we go ahead and get started without the rest of the board?
Wait.
Yeah.
I believe we're the only real members anyway, so
Yeah.
why not?
I just wanted
Ron
to...
is actually delayed. So, stall.
Okay. Oh, stall? Okay. I do know that Member Harla was going to be possibly absent, as well as Member Sandstedt. So,
If I could. Just a note that you don't need a quorum at these committees because you're not taking action. All the actions that would be taken are at the school board. So there we are.
yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I was aware of that. I just was debating if we should wait a few more minutes. But Member Welty's here now, so we're going to get started. Again, it's the July Education Committee meeting. And our first item on the agenda is informational items. And what is missing from here is Assistant Superintendent's monthly report, which she'll just briefly highlight, and it was emailed out to us earlier today.
Yes, I just was saying there wasn't a whole lot to my report, and in my communication with Nichelle, she thought I said I don't have a report, and she printed all the agendas, and I said, you know what, we're good, I'll just email it out. So you can see that in your email for the excitement that happens out of the Assistant Superintendent's office.
Okay, great, thank you. The second item on our agenda is the annual bullying report and training, and Ron Lake, our climate coordinator, is just running a little late, so, whoa, okay, Ron, do you need a minute, or can you join us? Okay, great, so Ron Lake, our climate coordinator, will be presenting our annual bullying report, and some updated policies are later around this.
In case you don't know who I am, my name's Ron. I was just in a meeting with some community partners and had a name tag on for it. So you'll see in your board packet there's really two sections. One is informational, and then the other one is a policy work. We'll do some reading on that, and if you want me to come back up later, I'm willing to do that. So it's just what's in here. We had 96 documented incidents of bullying through Infinite Campus this school year. 26 at the elementary level, 51 at the middle school level, 19 at the high school level. And then in terms of resolutions, one thing to note is when administrators enter in the resolution within our Infinite Campus system, they are required to select one resolution. They can't list or click all of them that they've used. They select one. So you'll see that they've had 16 of these incidents were resolved through a student conference. There was the application of detention and in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension, parent notification, and I guess it's misleading to think that any one of these was the only thing that was done to resolve an incident. That there's many things done, and when they go to select what they think they're selecting the one that fit the best. But there's one resolution that they can choose. They can choose only one. This information, the number of incidents, one of the things that was brought up last year was some concern about is this being underreported and underdocumented? And I think the answer last year was yes, most likely. And if you ask me that again this year, I'd say yes, most likely. And I think we're better at it. More kids are using our online reporting system. More students have shared that information with us. And we've increased the number of incidents that we've documented as bullying. The other thing I want to share with you is, particularly at the middle school and high school level, when there's an incidence of bullying that involves some physical harm, it may be coded as an assault. When it involves membership in a protected group or class, then it's coded as harassment. So there's lots of overlap between how behaviors are coded, but ultimately, if it's mean and it's intentional and it's affecting how a kid has a chance to participate in school, it's probably bullying, but it might also be harassment. It might also be an assault. It might also be something else. There's, I think, 27, 28 different behavioral codes that we have definitions for from the state. So we do our best to code it accurately, and we typically go with the one that matches with the highest level of offense that's involved in the incident. So, any questions or things that we want to talk about right away for this?
And just so we all know, so we're going to be talking about this, but then later on in the agenda, we do have a review of the policy around bullying. And so if there's any questions that have to do with that, let's save it for that part of the discussion. But Ron, I'm going to have you stay up here and we'll just jump to that on the agenda. But so questions, I think Member Oswald and then Member Welty. Lights were on.
As the number for elementary schools, the way I'm averaging it is about 3 per school of incidents. But is that fair to say that there's some bullying at each school, or is there hotspot schools where it tends to happen more often based on the population makeup?
I think bullying happens in every school across the nation, and certainly true with every school within Duluth and Duluth Public Schools. Some schools document. The other thing I guess I want to be clear about is we're using, these are office discipline referrals, okay? So we document when a kid is referred to the office for discipline. That's what we're looking at for it. And then we then take that data and try and use it as incident data. So when teachers address a behavior in a classroom and they don't send the student to the office, it doesn't get documented as an office discipline referral. When the student receives some special services and they go to their case manager or their school social worker or their school psychologist, or they go to the counselor instead, then it's probably not going to be documented as an office discipline referral. So we're looking at data based on the number of times a student has been sent to the office for discipline that's been determined to be a situation of bullying. And that's a much more limited number of incidents than the incidence of bullying in any given school. Does that help?
I do appreciate that clarification, because
Yep.
that was going to be my follow-up question, as when a kid comes home, tells a parent of something, and a parent calls, that's not included in these numbers?
When a parent calls and shares a concern that bullying has happened or may be happening, we need to investigate that. And when we investigate that and determine it's bullying and apply discipline, then we should document that in Infinite Campus. And then it's going to show up in this report. There's a lot of situations where there's a conflict between two kids, and it isn't determined to be bullying. And it wouldn't show up then in Infinite Campus as a bullying situation. If both of them receive discipline, it might be determined to be a fight, and then documented as a fight. But not every time a parent calls and says, Ron was bullying Sally, does Ron get referred to the office for discipline and then get documented. Because those situations need to be investigated, and it needs to be determined that it happened.
True. And I apologize for my lack of clarity in that.
Yeah, no.
In that question. I guess where I'm getting at is you said it should be documented if a parent expresses concern and investigated.
Yep.
And you've already admitted that we're not a perfect system yet, and it doesn't automatically get documented all the time. What are the steps being used to remind principals to document?
Yeah, so there's some good things in place through the Minnesota Safe and Supportive Schools Act, the law that provides guidance and direction for us as a school district in our policy and our practices. We have policy that we'll be talking about in a little bit. And then we also have, part of that law requires training. So we have a training cycle that we do. And then we have some practices and procedures that we're continually working on. One of them is the next page in the report here. So I want to talk with you about that, but I also want to make sure that we've answered or discussed any of the frequency data first. Is that cool?
I just wanted to tap into what he was articulating. Just as a principal, I may have a parent contact me saying, my son or daughter came home last night, they reported this is happening. And so as a principal then, you do that investigation, and through the definition that we have in our policy work and in our student handbook, if we feel that through that investigation it is indeed a bullying incident, that does indeed get it written into an office referral, and the consequences are applied per the student handbook. So the person who reports the incident isn't necessarily the determiner of whether it makes us report. It could be a student, it could be a teacher, it could be a parent. It's really the principal then identifying whether it truly meets the definition of bullying, and if it does, consequences are identified and then documented. So it shouldn't matter who the reporter is, if that makes sense.
Member Welty?
Thank you. Mr. Lake, a couple quick questions. You indicated that some incidents of bullying might involve physical harm or protected classes, in which case they'd be labeled as assault or harassment rather than bullying. Are these 96 documented cases all just pure bullying according to our policies, or do any of these include harassment or assault as well?
When I look through them, I think we've really gotten better at distinguishing if it involves someone that is part of a protected group and the harm they receive is based on their membership in that protected group, then we've gotten much better at documenting that as harassment. So I think this list of 96 is probably more accurately grouped than it has been in years past. Having said that, if we looked through all 96 of them, we could probably find 5 or 6 or 10 that might have belonged over here, or over here, or over here. But I think this is a reflection of some good work.
I'd like to commend you, because I think this all came up about a year ago when we were talking about documentation, and this shows to me that you and others have taken considerable pains to make sure that we're thinking this through and documenting it. So bully for you in the Teddy Roosevelt sense. Another question, this talks about resolutions, and of course resolution assumes that things come to an end, and I'm sure all of these have been dealt with, but I'm not necessarily sure that whatever the cause of the bullying necessarily goes away. You've got some things here like detention, ISS, OSS, and I can certainly imagine that somebody who is given ISS might go back to their old ways again and continue bullying. When you talk about resolutions, do you mean it in the sense of the incident is over with to satisfy both parties in the bullying, or? Yeah,
that's a good question, and thanks for asking. Resolutions is a word that comes directly from Infinite Campus. So when we enter in the incident or the event, and then we document the description of it, it asks for what did you do as a resolution, and then it gives a drop-down menu of these items that are listed here. So that's a term specific to our student data management system. So then when we run a report, the name on the report is the resolution report. I think it's easy to then assume, like you're asking about, does that mean it's all resolved? And I think there are situations that continue, even though there's been a resolution applied. But that's how, in our reporting system, That's the language that we're given. And then without a resolution, if we don't provide a resolution, then it's hard to get good information out of the report when we're trying to look at data too. So I think there's a need for us to close out an incident in the sense of having a resolution to it, because it allows us to use data.
As a practical matter, I assume of the 96, I think you said you indicated you kind of looked through these 96 to see how they were being reported. I'm imagining that there's cases of recidivism, so somebody might have bullied somebody else, been given ISS, and then gone back and done it again, so that some of these incidents might involve the same people a couple of different times. And I imagine, just as in the criminal justice system, we would tend to ratchet up from ISS to OSS and things of that sort. Do you have any sense how much of these might be the same people over again, or?
You know, when I looked at this, it was second week of June, and I think it'd be unfair of me to guess, but you're right in that there's absolutely a number of students that are having a number of, it isn't 96 individual students doing 96 individual events. There's multiple students involved in multiple incidents.
Well, I came in the process because it looks like we're really, we've spent so much time on bullying. It looks like we're thinking this through. And I'll refer to something that Mr. Hassler talked about when we were talking about insurance the other day. I asked him about what we reported. If somebody gets a nick and they put a Band-Aid on it, do we report every little thing? Mm-hmm. And Mr. Hassler's view is you report absolutely everything that might have some consequence you don't anticipate. And I think there were 26 reportable OSS or OSHA reportable incidents, but there were only 3 of any serious consequence, and our insurance for that went down a great deal. And there's some analogy here between our keeping track of all things that might be bullying, that might be very modest, and again, I commend the district for keeping close watch over this.
Thank you, Board Member Rolte. One additional comment I guess I'd say is these are incidents. So any one of these incidents may involve 2 or 3 students, or 3 or 4 students. So if we look at the number of students that are involved, it would be a different number than 96.
Thank you for clarifying that. I had a question. In coming up with this reporting, is it something that's being similarly done in other districts? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Reporting to the board, you mean?
Yes, and using, yeah.
We as a district have to document out of school and in school suspensions. We have to document certain things within campus. So I think how we document this in campus is pretty consistent, and then all schools are held to reporting their out of school suspensions and such. So this is probably more detailed than what some districts are doing.
Member Oswald?
I just had a question about the not documented number.
Yeah.
Is that, does somebody have to manually go in and check that it's not documented, or is that the default setting, or is that like cleanup just to make it equal the top number? How does that work?
I think it would be cleanup to run the report and then identify which ones haven't been documented, and then go back to those folks and say this needs to be documented, right? So that would be cleaning up things that aren't complete.
Okay.
Yeah. In this case, I don't know, in the absence of adding a resolution, if maybe people get busy and they just don't go back in a day later to document what they did. You do that 7 times out of 100, and then you get 7 that are undocumented, and I can't speak to the reasons. I'm not the one that documents it.
Sure. I just didn't know if it was an automatic production of documented.
Yeah, I don't know, because we're getting into the minutia here, but at Infinite Campus, most of the reports we take the data and put it into Excel, and then Excel gets you a spreadsheet, and then you've got a table to work with. And so I'm a couple of steps removed. Second page I want to share with you. It's a protocol and flowchart. So this is something that I worked with John Flaw and a number of assistant principals on last school year. Each one of these, if there's a line underneath it, it's a link to a resource. So at the very top, we're asking, and I think this is pretty consistent with schools across the nation, we're asking teachers to sort out collectively what's going to be managed in the classroom, what's going to be managed, by the office. So we've got both, you see elementary and secondary are both underlined, and there's some guiding documentation for schools to work with for what's office managed versus classroom managed. If it's over on the teacher side, they've got some drop-down tools and some information available for them on some things that they can do in the classroom. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, there's some steps that they can follow, including referring it to the billing administration, and then it becomes something that's office managed. Over on the administrative side, there's a couple of options right away where principals can communicate through an investigation tool that we have, or a letter. And if that's successful, then it's well documented, hopefully, in Infinite Campus. And if it's not successful, or people remain unsatisfied, then there's a secondary process to that. And ultimately, if someone isn't satisfied with what we're doing at a building level or with my work, then our supervisor is Amy. And people are always welcome to talk to our supervisor about something too. This flow chart we wanted to share with you and to help you understand, or to at least help you be aware of some of the day-to-day work that's being done with staff and principals.
Can you talk a little bit about our training plans for this fall with staff?
Yeah, so the Safe Support Schools Act requires training on a 3-year cycle. So we are working with principals in August. We're finalizing our training, and then principals will be sharing that. We're going to share it with the principals in August, and the principals will be sharing it with their staff. I think it's the 28th, 29th or so of August during that workshop, those workshop days. So I think then they'll have a chance to better understand it and have a second run through policy, procedure, regulation, as well as some strategies to prevent and create positive school climates.
I'm excited about it. As opposed to doing a large mass training with all staff, this will be a more intimate type of environment with their principal, where they can ask various building-specific things. But an important part of that law is really making sure staff understand their role in observing and addressing bullying, and so that will be part of that presentation. And like I said, I'm excited about the more deep conversation they'll be able to have at the school level, and everybody will get at least the same amount of information, because there'll be a structure for the dialogue, and then there'll be more building specific questions that'll be answered by the building principal. So I think it'll be good.
I was going to actually ask this when we went over the policy, but being you brought it up, I just wanted to know, besides the teaching staff, what other staff will be a part of that training?
My understanding is paraprofessionals are typically part of those staff meetings, certified staff, integration specialists, so the people who are typically on site each day would be a part of that training. I guess I can't answer like custodians or cooks. I can follow up on that group, but for the most part, the people that the principal oversees on a daily basis would be part of it.
Okay. Did you have more to add to this before okay. Member Welty and then Member Oswald, I saw.
Just a quick question. Is the flow chart that you've given us, is this what you would see if you were filling out Infinite Campus, or is this on our website under harassment policies?
Probably neither. Right now, it's a tool for staff and building administrators to use. So this is separate from Infinite Campus. It's just made in a Google Doc, and it's just shared out, and it'll be part of our training content.
You mentioned it had links on it, the underlying
Yep.
thing, so I imagine it being a computer doc.
Yeah, when we share it out through Google. Yep.
Member Oswald?
I just have two questions. Does special ed have their own training for paras, or are all these all together? And so paras will be included?
Paras will be included,
Okay.
and if they are a para that works through special services, then they receive additional training through special services.
Okay. And my second question kind of is concerning this flow chart that I'm looking at. There's been, not many, but a couple instances when, I can see where parents have come to me as a board member, having gone through whatever these cycles detail, and you get to the end box where you have the meeting in person or a phone call and hear concerns and discuss options and make a plan, and it continues. Mm-hmm. But yet that's like the end on this plan. So is there a way to, if this flow chart were to be presented to people like parents to say this is the process that we follow, that they don't have the feeling that if the plan fails, that's it?
Sure. Looks like Amy's got a response. And I'd share with you that at each one of these stops in the process, we ask people that if it continues, that you tell your building principal. And when I've worked with Amy in the past, it's if it continues, make sure you tell me, and then we'll come back together and we'll sort out next steps. It hasn't been my experience that it's communicated that this is done and now you're on your own. It's been, this is done, and if it isn't done, and if it happens again, here's who to contact, and here's what we can try next.
As a building principal, one of the things that makes this process very difficult is when reports aren't made. And so we can't address and investigate issues that go unreported. So if you do field those phone calls as board members, please reiterate to report immediately back to the principal, so those incidents can be immediately investigated. And as part of our policy and practices, we have procedures in place for how that investigation should happen. I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say something else. It was going to be brilliant. I'll think of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll think of it again, I'm sure.
Would it have to do with if it fails?
Yes. So part of being a building principal is I was very clear about if future incidents occur, this will be the consequences and this will be how it's handled. And going back to your comment earlier, if incidents continue to happen per the student handbook, the consequences ramp up significantly. So as a principal, you try to be very clear about that. And a part of this process that Ron has put together and in these forms, there's really nice documentation in here, so everybody's crystal clear about if incidents happen, this is who you report to and this is how it's going to be handled, so that is not a gray area for people to understand if it continues in the future. So we hope we don't get to that bottom box where we feel that the issue has not been resolved, but through the student handbook, if the same student is experiencing or doing the same behavior, that consequence should be ramped up. Now, on a separate note, I can't control other people's behavior and I can't predict what will happen 2 weeks from now. But as a principal, you can put as much in place to try to prevent that behavior. You can tell kids they shouldn't be by each other, or you can try to create other things. And so we do our best to try to create those systems as well.
Okay, thank you.
Ron?
If we're moving on to policy, we're going to turn to page 16.
So we're going to jump down again and to the action items we'll be taking, and this is the first reading, and I'll let you take over from there.
So we're moving from the 5,000 number to the 500 number, consistent with Minnesota School Board Association. So you'll see on page 16, our 5,000 policy is completely struck through. That doesn't mean that we're changing all of it. It just means that we struck through the whole policy to indicate we're moving away from that 5,000 number. If you turn to page 23, you'll see some adjustments to the bullying prohibition policy. First adjustment is it's gone from number 5084 to number 514. Under definitions, there's been some clarity on the definition of bullying, so you can see what's listed there. The biggest thing that we did is we took the items 1, 2, and 3 and just put it into a statement. So statement B is instead of being listed out.
Can I add on to that?
Yep.
One of the reasons this is being brought to the board for revision is to be in line with MSBA, but also in some work with our attorney this year. They were working through they were reviewing the policy as part of some of the situations we were dealing with and made some recommendations. And so that's why some of those recommendations were incorporated into this as well. Didn't say that, did you?
I didn't.
Okay,
Thank
right.
you. Top of page 24. So there's model policy from the Minnesota Department of Education and from the Minnesota School Board Association. One of the policies lists out this information about intimidation, and one of the policies doesn't. So in our old policy, we didn't have it in there. We just referenced intimidation, but we didn't define it. We defined it this time. We added the definition of prohibited conduct. And then we clarified that what immediately means to be one school day instead of 24 hours. So I think that's a more realistic approach for a school system. To do something immediately is probably within one school day. Top of page 25. There's a statement of prohibition. Talks about some further clarification about who this policy applies to. And again, it's taking some of our bulleted items and turning it into a paragraph. Down at the bottom of page 25, you'll see that we had a running list, and it's just been changed to district employee, volunteer, or contractor. There's some additional information about the responsibilities of the building report taker, or most often it's the building principal. But the language from the law is that there's a building report taker, so we've designated our principals to be that building report taker unless they've chosen somebody else on their administrative team to do it. Page 27. Minnesota School Board Association policy, the model policy says, consistent with the law, no later than 3 school days. So we made that adjustment. And an opportunity for someone who's alleged as a perpetrator of bullying, a clear statement about that they have an opportunity to present their side of it. Some information on 28, specific to students that receive special services. Clearly stating that if someone receives special services or has a disability, we can adjust their plan to include teaching them skills to address being harmed in a way that they have a better chance of kind of standing up for themselves and being okay. Page 29, there's some information about students and parents and the rights they have and what's protected with data privacy. There's some content on some of the professional development we mentioned earlier. One of the things we're going to do with our professional development is create an online training tool, so then when there are new hires, they can take that training right away and not wait for a 3-year cycle to come around. I don't think that would be within the intent or the spirit of the law. And then under page 30, there's some adjustments to the notice section.
I'm just going to comment first, and then I see Member Welty has a question as well. But I've really appreciated the 4 years I've been on the board, seeing this process evolve and the community input that you've taken and the revisions that as a board that we've adopted as it's been brought forth to us both when we first adopted it in 2014 and then when it was revised in 2015. So I just want to, thank you again for continuing to help educate us as a board and allow us to provide input on this. For me, this is a very close to home policy, and it's been gratifying to be a part of and be able to give feedback on. The two pieces when I read through it that I think we've answered already, but that I look at a lot as I reviewed this policy every time is the training that we're doing, and that we're doing it consistently, and that we're doing it with all of our staff. And then I just, note that there's kind of a number of times it mentions training with volunteers and our contract workers. And I know, as being a volunteer coordinator at Lester Park for a few years, that's hard to do sometimes, and to make sure all our volunteers, the many hundreds of volunteers we have across the district, get trained. And so I'm concerned about that how are we going to address that, and can we use that online training with our volunteers and our contractors and that. So that's not really a question, but a kind of concern. Mm-hmm. And then I really appreciated, I know I had brought this up before, the notices, and that there's just multiple ways that we're notifying families and students and the community on processes that we're using. And so just appreciate that section, that it's so comprehensive. So those are just a couple of my comments, if you want to respond to any of them. But Member Welty?
Yes, just on page 26, you've the fourth paragraph from the bottom, crossed out a series of employees and then moved them elsewhere. I'm curious about a contractor. Would that be like student teacher or substitute teachers? Would they be contractors in the district that might be dealing with students, or who else would be a contractor that might observe bullying?
The thing I think about is like if we're bringing in someone to do staff development. I don't know, like but I don't know how we would have.
Well, every month we actually have a lot of contractors contracts that we review in our which committee is it in? I can't even think right now. But so it could be a number of.
Right. We have community partnerships where whether it's through a contract or an MOU or a memorandum of understanding, where we have other organizations with adults working with kids, and I think the intent of the law is that those folks should know about bullying and know how to report something that they're concerned about if they see something going on in an activity or a presentation or what other function they're performing as a contractor with students, that they know who to report to or share a concern with.
Well, my concern about contractors, my interest in is more and more people are having to go out on their own, don't have a big corporate or employer's insurance. They're contractors. They have a contract relationship with somebody they're providing a service for. And it did occur to me that sounds like a substitute teacher because they're operating on a daily basis. Would we consider them contractors?
I think they're our employees. They're a district employee.
Okay. not contractors.
But if First Witness comes and they do presentations across many of our elementaries, and they meet with hundreds and hundreds of kids, and if they see something going on in a classroom or in a setting that they're presenting or working with kids at, they should know who to go to and what the policy or the practices are at the school, so we would know about it and try and address it.
Is it possible for us in the contract that we all review as a board, and that we include watching the online training? I know from working with a lot of youth-serving organizations that they do bullying training in lots of different capacities, but is that possible?
We do have guidelines written into that contract about what, I don't think it would apply to all contractors, and I don't know if it'd be reasonable to watch a video, but I do think that we could put something in there about being knowledgeable or providing information for what Ron had articulated. So I think we can add a section in there.
Member Oswald?
2 questions. The first one references a building report taker. Does every building have a building report taker, and does everyone know who that is?
It's our principal. The building report taker is language from the Safe Report of Schools Act. Okay. And mostly what we just tell people is talk to your principal, report it to your principal, report it to your teacher, report it to any other adult that cares about you. But it's our, in practice, it's our principals.
Sure. And then on page 26, it lists the district employees who fail to inform the building report taker of conduct that may constitute bullying in a timely manner may be subject to disciplinary action. How can employees protect themselves that they reported something in an instance where a principal may not record that it was reported? So I'm concerned about employees doing the right thing and then the principal not remembering, or whoever it is, and then getting blamed.
I think one good strategy is that they could use our online reporting tool, and some do, and that's documented. Then it's documented the date and the time that it was received, and it's clear. You could probably send an email. There's probably a number of, you could probably write a note and then photocopy it yourself. There's probably a lot of practices.
A lot of our staff are asked to complete an office discipline referral. So that's your documentation oftentimes that an incident has happened.
Okay. And they know to do that? That's, I guess, my follow-up question. Is that staff
that's part of the training.
Should know to document what they're doing? Okay. Thank you.
I had a follow-up question on page 28, the section where it says school officials will notify the parents or guardians of students involved, blah, blah, blah. So that paragraph there, that's only if it's a confirmed report. So can you just, I guess, clarify that? When parents are notified in the process?
Sure. This policy is saying that when there's a confirmed report, we need to notify parents. Most people inform parents that there's something going on that I got to look into. We don't have a policy that says that. We've got some common practices to keep parents involved. There are times when principals, I just had a principal ask me about this section because they were concerned about the treatment that the student might receive if the principal had to call home. So I think there's some professional judgment about what's safe too, in a few rare circumstances. And then there's things that are just addressed in the classroom, day-to-day behavior, and we don't call home for every one of those situations. Yeah.
I would say, though, as a principal, one of your best supports is your parents. And so when you do have a situation, the results where I've had the best results have been where families have partnered with us as part of that problem-solving process and how to prevent incidents. So.
Mr. Welty?
Yeah, since we're looking at a first reading of this policy, I would make a suggestion. I hate obtuse language, and building report taker is kind of obtuse. So I'm wondering if we couldn't put the principal or other building report taker in there, just so that people who have no question about who that would generally be. Obviously, if you're in a transportation building, it's not going to be a principal, but I just think that would be a little cleaner and clearer.
I'll take a look at what's in the model policies. One of the things that we moved away from was the principal, listing the principal as the person, because I don't know. The law says there's a building report taker, so we've got this balance between what's practical and usable for a consumer, and then what lines up with law, and the other intent behind policy is to align with law, and I think we got to do both. So I'll take a look at what.
I can follow that. You said principal is a practical matter. The principals are generally going to be the people to make those reports. But I do believe that, like, if something serious is going on with children, everybody is sort of is obliged to report what they know. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if we couldn't put a parentheses or something making note of that and explaining it. Sure. Because it sounds like maybe there's just one report taker, and the way I think you've just described it now is everybody is potentially a report taker, and it might be nice to make it clear in the policy who should be making reports.
Right. I think there is room there to clarify, because anyone can receive a report of bullying or a concern of bullying. We need to identify one building report taker who has responsibility laid out in the law and the policy for what their roles are when they receive a report. They're the ones that need to document it, investigate it, things like that. So maybe in the definitions section, we could have a definition of the building report taker and be clear about that. That might help too.
Okay. And maybe at our next meeting where we consider this, if you incorporate that language, since you've got all the new stuff over the MSBA bolded, maybe you could just make a point of pointing that out at the meeting, or make a note within the text that this has been an addition based upon our discussion, whatever solution you come up with, Ron.
Fair.
Member Oswald?
To piggyback off of Member Welty's question there, I can just see it now when a parent reads a bullying policy because they're frustrated and then calls up a school and goes, I need to talk to your building report taker, and whoever's answering the phone is like, right. Who? Yeah. So I think there is a need there, obviously, to figure that out, because that's not common. Those aren't common words in our district. And I had another comment about, or question about, what Member Loeffler-Kemp brought up about notifying parents. I noticed it doesn't say what the notification is or how the notification is made, and probably alludes to some of the comments that were made about safety and discretion. But is there the intentional vagueness of that a hindrance to how parents will receive notification, being that, a principal would say, I left a voicemail. Is that considered notification? What is notification and what isn't notification? That's, I guess, where I'd want more clarity. Is it a direct contact? Is it a letter in the mail? Is it, but yet you don't want to be arguing over, you never told me. I mean, I'm looking at avoiding arguments and creating better communication.
So the question is, what constitutes notification?
Right. And what can a parent expect, or, yeah.
I think it goes back to what's the intent of that paragraph, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You're typically notifying parents because you need them to be a part of the problem solving. It's not just kind of a notification, hey, this was reported. You're typically working with them to resolve the issue as well. Wouldn't you agree? And so it wouldn't, I don't see that happen. And I also think it's going to depend on the situation. It's going to depend on the developmental age of the child, how that looks and feels different. And so I wouldn't want to send a letter to a kindergarten parent. That would be not the right approach. So I don't want to put too much.
I gather that.
Yeah.
But I'd like to avoid those situations where, they try to reach out, nobody ever connects, and then you can say you tried, but does trying count? I don't know. And these are highly volatile situations normally where you really want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and communicated with. So
sure.
I'm just pointing out a little leeway that might need to be tried.
Yeah, I could see that potentially happening. Right now, notification consists of phone calls, emails, letters, and the use of our investigation tool. Those are the 4 primary ways that we're communicating with parents about an incident, the child being involved in an incident in some way. And face-to-face. We have many parents are bringing their kids to school and walking them in and walking them out, and I see many teachers and principals just talking to people when their parents are in the school too. So those are the 5 primary ways that we're currently notifying people.
Member Welty?
Yeah, Mr. Lake, how is it that you got yourself in a position where you always have these difficult, prolonged discussions with we school board members? It seems like every time you come, we throw you into the weeds.
Years ago, a mentor of mine, Dean Grace, if anybody knows him, I was working in a treatment center, and I needed to have a series of difficult conversations with parents, and he would tell me, Ron, I can't do it for you, but I can talk with you before and help make sure you're ready. And I said, they're just difficult, Dean. And he says, yeah. And what he told me and what he tells himself is it's probably difficult because it's important. And if I reframe things that feel difficult to things that are important, it's pretty doable. It feels different for me that way. And I think this is important stuff. So I think it's worth taking the time to talk about it, and clearly you all do too. So I think it is important, and we all must, because we take the time to talk about it and work on it. So, thank you for your time.
No, I just want to, thank you for all the work that you do underneath that role of climate coordinator, and for your professionalism as a social worker. Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Have a great night.
Okay. So, move back to our informational items, and we do not have any grant applications or regulations. So then we're on action items, and we don't have any presentation items requiring approval. And then we're on policies, and we're the second reading of our wellness policy, and I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent.
I have received no feedback since the first reading, so that's where we're at. Since the second time.
Yeah. So we're good to go. On the wellness policy, we'll be voting on that next week. And then we discussed the item 3, the bullying, and item 4, and then C is the 2017 graduates, and we have the listings from Denfeld, East, ALC, and online from the programs. And I counted like 646 kids in all of that, but I know, there's more kids who've graduated this year. But we have all of that we approve every year at the July meeting. Any questions on that? Okay. I would just say, I've gone to a lot of graduation parties this year, and it's always fun to talk to the graduates and just ask them, what's been some of their successes and challenges in our schools. And I tell you, I've heard lots of great things about wonderful teachers. So, and then the next item is data sharing agreements, and we just have two, or one, the Regents, yeah, two. And then no resolutions at this point, and the future updates will be further policy updates. So that concludes the Education Committee, and we'll be meeting next Tuesday for our regular scheduled board meeting. Have a great weekend. It's only Tuesday. I'm still on vacation mode. Have a great weekend. Yeah, we are. No, you're not. Okay. Member Walty, yeah?
Speaking of vacation mode, I will not be in attendance at the next meeting. I will be probably over the Pacific, heading off to find out what is on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. So I wish you all well.
Okay, great. Have a safe trip. Safe travels. Okay.
Plane or boat?